Thank you for joining us for 3Bs on the Law podcast, hosted by Trisha Barita, Camille Canali, and Susan Dawson. Disclaimer, this podcast is for entertainment and informational purposes only, not meant to provide legal advice, and does not create an attorney-client relationship. Also, remember, laws change or they differ by jurisdiction, so this is not a substitute for seeking legal counsel in your jurisdiction on the current law applicable to you.
Hi, everybody, and welcome to another episode of 3Bs on the Law. Today, we're going to talk about something a little different, and we're going to talk about things you need to think about as you're growing your business, or what we call scaling your business. And so you want to, and I always think the most important thing is your business culture, especially as you start to acquire employees. You know, you want to think about what you want the culture of your business to be, and you want to make sure that it's a culture that can grow with your business, and you may have to make adjustments to it for time to time, especially if you're growing rapidly, because not all cultures work in big businesses that work in small businesses. And so it's something you really have to think about, and sometimes take a step back and really work to create a culture that makes all your employees happy. But not only that, you also want to think about the legal structure. And I know, Trisha, you were commenting on that before we got started here today.
Yeah, so I think when you're looking at the legal structure of your business, when you're starting out, it may make more sense for you to be an incorporated business or an LLC. And some of that may come into play with like how much, money you're gonna, revenue you're gonna have, and like your determination of like whether or not you'll be, switching at some point or making changes to what the actual structure of the business is at some point, or if you're going to intend to sell the business and how easy that's going to be. Is it going to be an asset sale? All these things when you're scaling your business, because really a lot of businesses, as they grow, the thought of at some point selling the business comes into play, and you have to figure out how you build that up. I think that always starts with, what is the actual legal structure of the business? And then you start to think about who are the players in the business. So who are the owners of the business? Who are the different, with an LLC, who are the members of the business? Who are going to be the investors in the business? And how is that all being set up legally so that you can kind of follow through as the business grows? As you grow, you may need to get funds from a bank. You may need to get funds from investors. You may have a growth where you're, giving stock out and you're growing it as a corporation. And so kind of figuring out the legal structure and how it's going to grow, how you anticipate it to grow, and where you really want it to go. I think all of those kinds of things are important. I think also like the actual setup of the business legally, like as far as like the internal pieces of who is going to be managing the business, who's going to be responsible. Are you going to be creating departments? Are you going to be creating, more of a growth model where people are working in a collaborative environment, everybody's kind of got a piece in everything, or is it going to be completely separate, and who's going to be in charge of all that, and sort of moving those pieces around as you grow, especially when it comes to like human resources and contractual requirements. Somebody higher up in management needs to be making the decisions on who's going to have the authority to step forward and represent the business, and who's going to be having the authority to make decisions about employees and hiring and firing, so it's not any sort of confusion. But I also think that, the outside pieces of the business, like trademarking, are important. I think, Susan, you were going to talk about that.
Sure. I mean, usually trademarking is something that a lot of new businesses don't feel that they have the money to invest in at the time they're doing a startup. Hopefully you've done a trademark search, but if you haven't, that's okay. But hopefully you did an initial search just to make sure that your logo is protectable. But at a certain point, it could be a good idea to go ahead and make sure that that logo is protected. The more that you go out there and market, and you're going to be working on branding and really trying to ensure that your name, logo, whatever it is that you're using is recognizable out to the public as you grow. Make sure that it's protected, because the more visible you get to the public for potential customers and clients, Also, the more public you get for someone else who might feel that your logo or name or whatever it is violating their trademark or their use. So before you put, I always tell clients, before you put a lot of money into a big old neon sign to put on your building or that really expensive marketing campaign, make sure that you can protect your intellectual property. So, but also as you grow, there's different licensing requirements and additional, there might be additional, government regulation that you need to be aware of. So Camille, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, I think it really depends upon the type of businesses. Like I know for sure in LA, if you want to do business in the city, your business is based in the city of LA, you have to have a license from the city. That's, I think, pretty common in most places. But depending upon where your business is and what type of business you do, you may have to have multiple licenses. You may have to have a license from the state. You may have to register. So for example, security companies, they have to register in the state of California with the entity that governs security companies. If you do federal work, you may have to have some federal filings. If you do work for the state, you may have to have other state filings. So it's always a good idea to at least do a Google search and find out for your type of business what you need to do, because there could be multiple places that you have to register depending upon the type of business that you do. It's really I call it location by location and type of company, type of business dependent. And so the other kind of aspect of that is I call it everybody's nightmare, OSHA. And so Tricia, when we talk about OSHA, kind of what does that mean to you?
As far as scaling, I think, right?
Right.
Specifically, I think it's pretty easy to realize and be celebrating in your head the business growing and not realize you're now, at risk for a lot more different OSHA violations than you had originally anticipated, because maybe the original people that you hired had a lot of qualifications and OSHA background. So they really were setting up things in a way that was in compliance with OSHA because of their background. But as you grow, you hire more employees, maybe don't have that experience, and you don't provide the proper training. All of a sudden, you're kind of running into these issues. I think a good example would be like in a warehouse. Like it's very easy when you start out, you have some inventory, you have a warehouse, you have some ladders people are getting on, you have maybe one forklift. All of a sudden you grow, you have more expanded space, you're in a much larger warehouse, there's multiple forklifts going on, you have much different capability for violations, for instance, with OSHA related just to forklifts, and how everyone has to be certified and how they have to be trained and how they have to follow specific requirements. And if they don't have those, then you're not technically in compliance. And so that's just one example of making sure that you have those considerations in place. So early on, hopefully, if you're getting into the world where you're going to be dealing with a lot more potential OSHA issues, you are setting up those safety considerations. They should be higher on your priority list if you, especially if you're doing all kinds of things. For instance, roofers, people getting on a roof. It's a lot of different rules about how that's supposed to go. When you're on the roof and you have to get rid of the trash that's on the roof because you're putting on a new roof, for instance, there's a whole bunch of rules about how that trash comes to the ground. You can't just chunk it off the side of the house. So the new guy may not really fully know that. So, and you send them over there to do some work before you have the major supervisor checking in on them. You can have problems, people can get injured, you can have property damage and run into all kinds of issues. So my thought is that you start out with making sure what you're susceptible under, what laws under OSHA are you under, and start building out that safety so that once people come on, they immediately get that training, and that, there's no question that, and then you have to have follow-up, of course, because people that are new to OSHA are, may not take the training as seriously as people that understand that, how serious OSHA violations can shut down a business.
Well, and the fines can be expensive.
Yep.
And a lot of business owners don't realize that if you have a workplace accident, depending upon the severity of the accident, you have to report it to OSHA, and that triggers an inspection, which can bring on a whole host of other problems that you weren't thinking about.
Right. They're not going to come and just look at that one issue. They're going to be looking at your whole situation.
So it's quite frankly, and a lot of times it's family businesses where this comes up in, that they start out as a family business, and as they grow, they don't realize the compliance issues. But insurance is kind of, I know I harp a lot about it on here, and I know, Susan, you talk about it with your clients a lot. Also, the insurance requirements can change as a business grows.
Well, sure. I mean, as with everything, you've got more complexities, and you've got more liability risk as you grow. So you want to make sure that you have the right amount of coverage, the right amount of dollar coverage. You know, the dollar coverage in the beginning of a business isn't always going to be enough for the growing, evolving. In Trisha's example, multiple forklift example, we need more coverage. There's more liability risk. So you want to make sure that you're constantly checking your policies. Do you have enough coverage? Ask your insurance agent, what do you need? At a certain point, if you're adding on employees, do you want employee practices liability insurance? Do you need cyber insurance? Are there different other policies out there that can be helpful to you? When you're starting out, a lot of times, especially if you're just a really small startup, you might just have renter's insurance and an umbrella policy, but suddenly there's a lot more that you could need. So make sure you're constantly reviewing those policies and understanding your protections, understanding the exceptions and the loopholes, right? And making sure that you're covered.
Yeah, and as you diversify, a lot of people don't realize this, but as you diversify, you may actually need a different type of policy or a different type of coverage than you already had. So it's something to keep in mind as you diversify, because hopefully everybody is successful and gets to that point.
Right, exactly. And then once you're protecting, you're protecting with insurance, and you're protecting with your trademarks and all of that. A lot of times it's time to start thinking about protecting against your other intellectual property and your other potential assets, right? So confidentiality policies, Camille, and I know non-competes don't really exist in California, but confidentiality policies do. So talk to us about that.
Right. So, I've said before, we've done a podcast actually about non-competes, and there are very few exceptions, but in general, those aren't allowed. But you can have a non-disclosure agreement, and, those are allowed. And when your employee leaves, he has to return all of the confidential information he has. And if they don't, you could have a violation of an NDA. And a lot of those come with a pretty hefty liquidated damages clause, at least here in California, that we see. And so and attorney's fees. The loser has to pay attorney's fees often, depending upon how it's written. So I don't really have a whole lot to say about that. Trisha, do you have anything to add on that issue?
No, I don't.
And so I think that the last area we wanted to talk about is the employment policies and procedures can change as you grow your business. There are different requirements depending upon the number of employees you have, and that changes drastically in California. If you have 1 employee, if you have 5 employees, if you have 24 employees, if you have 56 employees, if you have over 100 employees, there are different policies that you may have to comply with for all of those. So as you're expanding your business and you hit those kind of marks of 25 employees, 50 employees, you really want to think about the changes you have to make to your employment policies. But Trisha, I know in Texas, you guys follow federal law, don't you?
Yeah, I mean, we have state laws for all of it, but they are I won't say they're identical, but they're very, very, very close to the federal. They don't want to expand beyond the federal. So Texas kind of is close to that. And so we're going to see the normal, the DOL is always going to be 1 employee, right? But once you scale your business, you're getting into I'm always asking, are we under 15? Are we over 15? Because 15 is such a marker, especially for Title VII. of course. So we're looking, and then age discrimination, and then 20, of course, age discrimination, and then 50 FMLA. So and then Americans with Disabilities Act 15. So like I'm looking at those numbers, obviously different numbers than you, Camille. Are we at 15? Are we at 20? Are we at 50? And so when I see those numbers and someone's business is growing there, I tell them, you're at 13, just want to let you know, when you get above that, we're going to need all these additional policies in your handbook. We're going to need some training, make sure everyone understands. The ADA is so confusing. So I think that's the, Title VII is huge, obviously, but I think the Americans with Disabilities Act and the right to accommodate, that's just such a huge and confusing thing for, I think, a smaller business to move into and really not understand how important it is and how easy a failure to accommodate a disability case can be built by you just not knowing what to do. And so I would say those are like kind of big markers for us in Texas.
And the special thing in California is they can sue under the state law if they want, or the federal law. So it's really kind of a win-lose situation in California, depending upon which the plaintiff's lawyer chooses to go after you on. What about in Illinois, Susan?
Illinois we used to have a lot more levels, 10 employees, 15, and all of that. But most laws go into effect with one employee these days. So it's just, not all. Obviously there's exceptions, but there's a huge jump from 0 to 1 here in Illinois. And I always say that that's a hard burden, that when you have no employees and suddenly you have one employee, you're suddenly expected to be an expert on all these complicated employment laws, just like every, and somebody who has 500 employees. There are exceptions to that. I'm speaking with generality, but it can be a hard burden on the employer here.
All right. I think that's kind of all I had in mind that we were going to talk about today, ladies. Anything else?
Nope.
Just scale up, stop. I really say it's a good thing, right? As your business grows and your problems grow.
All right, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us on this episode. Thank you for joining us on today's podcast of 3Bs on the Law. Don't forget to like and subscribe to our podcast. We also welcome any comments. If you'd like to get in touch with us or suggest a future topic, you can email us at 3THREEBsonthelaw@gmail.com. And because we're lawyers, we need to remind you that this podcast is not meant to provide you with legal advice and does not create an attorney-client relationship. Thank you again for joining us, and have a great day.